Make the headlines though. Don't say if I the only.
What you want I do? He done ban me.
You your friend, you got a responsibility.
Wait, you want me confront him?
No, I want you to play your part to stop the violence safely.
Save violence against women no more. Report. Get help. Call 914.
The killing of another woman.
Hello, sister. I'm Val. I know what you're going through. I've been there too. Slaps, shouts, cuffs and kicks, endless licks. I thought I would never get out. This is not what love is about. Love is respect, autonomy, and equality, not emotional, financial, and psychological cruelty. There's no excuse for abuse. Say violence against women no more. Dial 914.
The killing of another woman.
How many more rapes, beatings, and killings must women endure? It's time for zero tolerance to gender-based violence. We shall no longer tolerate any form of violence against women and girls. And as a society, we pledge to create an environment in which they can lead safe and healthy lives. We call on our national and community leaders to stand firmly against gender-based violence and commit to mobilizing needed resources. Laws against violence to women and girls must be strengthened and implemented as we work together to provide free legal aid, shelters, counseling, and medical services for survivors. Say violence against women no more. Call the Domestic Violence Helpline 914.
This message was brought to you with the kind support of the Caribbean Vulnerable Communities Coalition.
Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Gender-Based Violence, Let's Talk GBV, a production by Miranda Incorporated with the kind support from the Caribbean Vulnerable Communities Coalition, CVC, a Jamaica-based defender and enabler of the health rights and well-being of vulnerable populations in our Caribbean region. Today, we want to move on with our conversation to talk about networking to address gender-based violence. And in doing so, we have an incredible lineup of speakers today that really share with us how exactly we could forge partnerships to not just prevent gender-based violence, but to respond to those particular cases that may arise, but also to facilitate access to justice, which is really rooted in the fundamental human rights of all people. My name is Kobe Smith, and I will be honored to guide this conversation this afternoon. But before we start with the conversation, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our panelists. First and foremost, we have Superintendent Crystal Robinson, who serves as the Community Relations Officer at the Guyana Police Force. Then we have Diego Alfonso, Senior Gender Affairs Officer at the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security. And last, but certainly not least, we have Christina Williams, Youth Accountability Panelist at the She Decides movement. And I always joke to say that Christina Williams is actually the future Prime Minister of Jamaica. And when you hear from her this afternoon, you'll really understand why I'm saying so. And so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for making the time on this Sunday for us to talk about these contemporary issues. First and foremost, I want to start out with Mr. Diego. Why do you think we need all hands on deck to respond to gender-based violence, which is really a pandemic within this COVID-19 pandemic? Why is it important for us to have different facets of our society playing some kind of role in this GBV response?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very delighted to be a part of this panel this afternoon. Highly commendable. Incidentally, this very program itself underlines and underscores and demonstrates what we're talking about as it relates to networking and collaborating, which is an indispensable approach as it relates to a multi-stakeholder approach, networking, collaborating. It is said that collaboration is the new currency. And in every facet of society, all facets of society, it is being discovered more and more, even apart from the battle against gender-based violence. In business realms, they understand the importance of collaboration, networking. Even within there, you would find them interacting and collaborating among faith-based organizations, among various agencies and clubs, and so on. It's like it is something that has become very synonymous with achieving success. It is being understood more and more. Just as one individual person cannot accomplish his or her goals and ambitions without the help of someone else. Each and every individual, wherever they are and they have arrived in life, they can truly say it is because of the help of someone or two people or three people. Some level of cooperation and collaboration had to be taking place along the way. The whole concept of success in this world and in this life is about connecting and collaborating and networking. And so bringing it home, bringing it to bear on the topic today, it's the same. There must be collaboration, networking, multi-stakeholder approach. I think we are maturing as a nation to the point where we could be moving away from pointing fingers at any particular ruling government or agency or NGO or the church or the FBO in general. I think we're coming more and more to the place where we're understanding it's all hands on deck. Together we're gonna have to do it. Of course, there are times when we have to hold one or two agencies or entities or stakeholders accountable if we believe that they are not giving it their all or they're falling short. In a very respectful way, we approach and we discuss and we work it through. But networking is indispensable. This whole approach, stamping out gender-based violence.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Diego. I want to pull Christina into the fold at this point as a youth leader, youth activist, regionally and internationally. How do you see young people being mobilized to really move the needle to respond to this particular pandemic that has really caused devastation to families and communities across our region, across the world? How do you see us doing that from your perspective, Christina?
Thank you so much, Kobe, and thank you as well for having me here this afternoon on the panel. It's a good opportunity for me to share in this regional format. So in regards to mobilizing young people, as well as young people being involved, I think it starts at the grassroots level. And it's two ways. One, I think young people have to be empowered, both male and female, or whatever gender identity, in terms of knowing what our rights are. We'll realize that there are lots of issues when it comes on to negotiations in relationships, when it comes on to young people, and they're the ones who get older and they form these same relationships, and they may also perpetuate these same instances. So let me rephrase that. Young people are abused, and young people may become abusers later on. And so young people firstly have to be empowered in terms of what their rights are, as well as what are their responsibility to themselves and to others, so that they can be mindful of what the relationships that they're in, so they can protect themselves where possible, as well as they can protect others. So that's the first thing. Then we talk about how can young people become change agents as activists. A lot of young people are a part of different organizations that act as safe spaces for other young people, or just for communities and people overall. And we see a lot of different gender movements or gender specific movements that are led by young people, or they involve young people. So I think that young people are already engaged at that level, especially the grassroots level. But I think I also want to emphasize the importance of empowering young people outside of any activism or any advocacy or any civil sector group. It starts at the very basic level of empowering young people and educating young people. And I think many times we take that for granted. I'm going to give you a very simple example. You're in school and you see a little boy throw a stone at a little girl. And you'll hear everyone say, "Oh, don't mind him, man. I'm little girlfriend. It's okay." And I'm using the Jamaican colloquial expressions here, so forgive me if the persons here don't fully understand my dialect. And say, "Don't mind him, man. He's just playing with his girlfriend or whatever." And the truth is that these kind of sentiments actually feeds into the very issues that we're trying to solve at the higher level through the police force, through the civil society organizations. And it starts from just how we normalize certain behaviors. How it is that when young children and our young people overall are exposed to violence, whether it be gender-based violence or just into whatever type of violence, how it is that we speak to them about this, how it is that I would say, we try to explain what is happening, provide aftercare for them, etc., and don't just take it for granted that, oh, because you're from an inner city community or because you've been exposed to it in your house, etc., that they don't necessarily need any kind of interventions. So yes, young people can be mobilized through activism and advocacy. They already are, but I think it's important for us to focus on empowering and educating young people first. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for giving us that perspective, Christina. I know we have a representative from law enforcement, which is really important because we seem to think that whenever we talk about the GBV response, it's just one agency or just one group. But the Ghana Police Force is really a critical partner and a player in this response, but also prevention. And so I want to ask Superintendent Robinson, how exactly do you see the police's role in prevention, responding, but also ensuring that there's an environment where persons feel safe to come forward? What part exactly do you see the police force playing here?
Okay, Kobe, good afternoon. Thank you for having me on this program. The police play a critical role in gender-based violence. But as Ms. Alfonso rightly said, we need collaborative efforts because the police by themselves cannot deal with gender-based violence. Because a report was coming to the station, we entertain the report, we do what we have to do, make the necessary arrests, put the persons before the court. But that's not the end of it. I always believe that gender-based violence, you have to know the root cause of gender-based violence. And to have preventative measures, you have to go into the rural communities, all small lectures with people, sensitize them, empower them, let them know their rights. If you don't do that, they will think a simple insult is okay, but it's abuse. Because somebody start insulting you, embarrassing you, call you names, it's a part of violence. So we have to go out in the area, walk along with persons from the human services, talk to people, empower them and let them know their rights. Because a lot of people don't come forward. So we think that gender-based violence don't happen there. But now the police have created a friendly society with persons that you could come in, we have a room to entertain you, put you to sit, you must be at ease, and you would be able to confide in a police to give your report. Likewise, the perpetrator, we need to hear his side of the story also, his or her side of the story. So we don't want to hold a confrontation per se among the two partners, but we must listen to both sides of the story before we charge and put before the court. And at most time, person think it's just to lock them up, put them away before the court or isolate them from each other. No, you have to go more in depth. So when you work together, Each partner will play their part by sensitizing the victim and the perpetrator. And I think we will have less voice in the society.
Definitely. And thank you for underscoring the principles there. I'm hearing respect, I'm hearing, impartiality, I'm hearing fairness, because oftentimes we seem to think that in these particular circumstances, people's fundamental rights are just taken away, like they don't have the right to be heard or whatever. But I'm glad that you're underscoring that there's a process, an independent process that really goes through where time is given for these matters to be investigated and litigated and for them to be brought before the courts. So thank you for sharing that, Superintendent Robinson. I want to pull Diego back into the fold here. Because, Diego, we've been talking about this issue of engaging men and boys for years. And I know part and parcel of your work at the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security is really supposed to be how exactly, as a government agency, you bring persons into the dialogue, into the conversation to play a part in responding to these particular issues. And so my question really is, why is it important for us to engage men and boys in gender-based violence response and prevention? Isn't it just a women's issue? Why is it exactly? Is it important for us to have men and boys understand not just what is gender-based violence, but understand the issue of rights and justice?
Yes, thank you. Very interesting and timely question, Kobe. I think the office also mentioned it in passing, the importance of, for example, engaging the perpetrator, which most of the time, according to statistics, is the male. So, we're talking about networking and collaborating and so on. And very often when we talk about that, we also talk about partners in this whole fight, the word partners. And it's very important that we engage men and boys. So the statistics are showing that the males are the main perpetrators of the physical violence against women. And so I think we have some way to go in terms of engaging men and boys, not just as perpetrators, but engaging them as partners in this battle against gender-based violence. And so if we begin to not just see men as villains and women as victims, and we begin to remove that stereotype and that image in our minds. For example, most of the times when you hear certain phrases, eventually the image like domestic violence or even gender-based violence, sometimes in society, the image that comes to mind is the image of a very aggressive, vicious man beating the daylights out of a woman. That becomes the definition of gender-based violence or domestic violence. But I find society have a challenge in seeing men and boys as partners. Very often, consciously or unconsciously, they see them as the enemy to be slain and conquered. No. The enemy is the act itself, the violence. That is what we're really trying to stamp with. Because men and boys, just like women and girls, are human beings with feelings and emotions, and they too hurt. And we may not see them crying often, but they do cry. Of course, we have the whole different conversation about them internalizing those hurts and not crying and so on if they have to, and expressing themselves emotionally about how they feel, which sometimes we heard the term root cause earlier as well. Sometimes the root cause is that you see the difference between men and women is women, when something is bothering them, for the most part, they get it out, they talk. If they got to talk whole day about it and drive the man off the wall. But in the process, they're getting it out. And the man, on the other hand, will internalize, bottle up, just IT, as they say. And so after a time, of course, that's not healthy. He has to have some point at which he expresses himself and say, what is it that is hurting him? And also find the courage to reach out for help, for counseling. That's another thing. Sometimes we sell counseling. The way society sells counseling, it's like something bad. You need to go for counseling. You got to go for counseling. When you sell it like that, Counseling is a good thing. It's a wonderful thing, something to reach out for. When you sell it like that, it's, like I'm going to take it to the headmaster or get licks, that kind of a thing. But men, the importance is men and boys need to be seen as partners as well, and to be engaged, to have a be abused out and maligned and labeled and stereotyped, and that's not going to work. That's not going to work. We've got to engage them, speak to them intelligently, even if we hear some ignorance coming out from them. We maintain our intelligence. We let them know once the man realizes that you're in there on stupidness, you're biased, he will listen, and you speak to them and they will understand. And for the most part, it increases our chances. It is said that correction without relationship is equal to rebellion, but correction with some level of rapport and relationship could be equal to change. So that's one of the things we're encouraging, that we engage men as partners. Of course, when they have to be held accountable and there's certain consequences, the law run its course and so on. But in the process, we're saying, let's engage, let's talk. And of course, let's be proactive with them, not until the act is already done, then come. And so that's the significance and importance, just to scratch the surface of engaging men and boys.
Certainly. I'm really glad you touched the point on the issue of counseling, because there's this big misconception in our society where people seem to think that in an abusive relationship, two people going to counseling means that they need to go back together and go back at home and sing Kumbaya and lie down in bed. But sometimes counseling just means that the survivor just needs to understand that they're in a state of crisis, and if they don't leave, they may end up dead.
Yes.
It's also about introspection and understanding that. And so we really need to have a conversation about how we see the usefulness and meaningfulness of these particular services. But I'm glad you really touched that point, Diego. I want to bring back Christina back into the conversation. So Christina is the Youth Accountability Panelist at She Decides. And so when you hear She Decides, right off the bat, you seem to think that it's a women-centered, women-focused, women-serving organization. And on the point of men and boys, Christine, I wanted to ask, whether you think there is sufficient spaces globally for men and boys to participate, maybe perhaps in policy, in advocacy, but also with the understanding that something needs to be done at the root level. How do you see men and boys participating in those particular spaces, Christina? Are you seeing them exactly? What exactly are you seeing from your background, from your experience?
Okay, so I'm going to start off with something that may be a bit politically incorrect, but I must call it out. Let's just call a spade a spade. Most of the policies and the laws that are created about women are created by men. Laws that are created about our bodies, our rights, how we engage in the space, how we are protected, most of these laws are created by men. And don't let us ever forget it. Yes, there's a lot of advocacy and activism for women by women. But when it comes down to the laws that are actually created in parliaments around the world, not just in the Caribbean, these are created by men. So men have always had a space to protect us through legislation. Nonetheless, because I am a proponent and a big supporter of partnerships and of men and boys being included in the conversation, I will say that outside of men being the primary, I would say the primary writers of the laws in our countries, whether for women or any other issues, I think men also have the space to also offer themselves as partners. I don't think that it should be the responsibility of women for men to come forward and say, we want to be partners, because we know that there are a few among us, the bad bunch that give the rest of the population a bad name. And because it's not all men, and men love to remind us that it's not all men, because it's not all men, we are going to step forward. But in my experience, I have not really seen a lot of men, whether young men or men on the older spectrum, or rather the word mature spectrum, who have come forward and saying that we want to stand up for women. There are some, but I would love to see more. So if there are men watching right now this session, and if you truly feel like you want to be a part of this movement, I encourage you to come forward. But honestly, Kobe, I don't think it should become the prerogative of women. It should become the responsibility of women activists and advocates, and the responsibility of our organizations to be the one having to pull men to the table. Don't get me wrong, we should open up the space where we're saying, okay, we're going to be having an all gender conversation, or we're inviting men to this particular session or forum. Just like how we have men on this panel as we speak, you have to be deliberate in inviting them to the spaces, but I don't think it should become our responsibility to continuously be engaging them. If you truly want to be a part of the movement, then you should invite yourself. The next thing I'd want to say, and I keep talking about education and empowerment, I think one of the places that we need to go to when we talk about encouraging and educating men or involving men is, how it is that we treat the mental health of our sons and of our fathers, husbands, just men in the society. I think that that's definitely one thing I can point out that much more needs to be done. That is, men's mental health need to be valued, and there needs to be a lot of more intention around caring for men and providing safe spaces for men. So I definitely agree. When we talk about safe spaces for men, there are not many safe spaces for men, because men are expected to be tough, they're expected to be resilient, man nothing ball, man nothing cry, once again using my dialect. And so men suppress a lot of emotions, and unfortunately lots of them come out in negative ways. Despite that, I give no man the excuse to abuse a woman or anyone else. Same way I give no woman an excuse to abuse a man or anyone else. I think people have to check their emotions. But while we're saying that, while we're putting a responsibility on people, men or women, we also have to ensure that we provide spaces for men's mental health. And I think it starts off with how we treat our boys when they cry, how we allow them to cry, how we allow them to express their emotions in a constructive manner. We also need to be teaching conflict resolution in our schools. We teach so many things in our schools that are, in my humble opinion, in another life, I'm a student activist, and a lot of things that we teach in our curriculum, in our schools at different levels is so unimportant. You're teaching me European history and all these different histories that I'll never use, but you've never taught me how proper conflict resolution, how it is that we have peer-to-peer interactions, how it is that things like, how do you communicate to a woman that you love her, that she looks nice, without it becoming without you sexualizing her, without you making her feel like a piece of meat. We take these things for granted, but a lot of men, even when they become in their 40s, 50s, 30s, they don't know how to properly communicate a woman they like her, that they want to date her, that they want to engage with her in that kind of frame, and also how to take rejection. A lot of men don't know how to take rejection. And rejection is something that all of us, men and women, have to learn as a part of life. We're constantly rejected in life because nobody gets everything that they want. So I think some of these very simple skills need to be taught to men and women. Everyone should be taught these skills. Everyone should be taught how to engage peer-to-peer contact in a way that is constructive and safe for all. And mental health for men should be guarded, protected, and validated. But at the same time, I will never be the one to say that women need to focus all their energies or most of their energies in drawing men to the table. That's not our responsibility. We should create the open space. We should have an open invite, but men need to also take the responsibility to offer themselves and invite themselves to the spaces. Thanks. Kobe, I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was saying thank you, Christina. That was really powerful in just laying out the framework and laying out where we are and where we want to go and who are the persons that really have the responsibility to really participate. So that's really incredible. I want to shift gears now to Facebook because we have some comments, and we're actually inviting and encouraging persons to comments on Facebook. We're also streaming on YouTube as well. And so if persons have particular comments or questions they would like to share, they have the opportunity to do so. So Kamal Prasad from Facebook said, women are not the perpetrators to the extent as men, according to common knowledge, backed up by data. Therefore, the core of the issue should be addressed, which is the aggressive gender. I agree that men and boys should be educated on gender-based violence. Thank you, Kamal, for sharing that. And that's really part of the theme here, in understanding that, yes, we understand that perpetrators are responsible for gender-based violence. We don't blame survivors or victims for the violations meted out to them. But there is a conversation about how exactly do we have targeted interventions to particular perpetrators who are really responsible for these particular issues. Also from Facebook, we have a comment, well, actually a question from Simone Kelman, Washington. And the question is for Mr. Diego Alfonso. And Simone says, or Simone is asking rather, would you say that men don't talk out or show emotions like crying, etc., could be the way boys are socialized in our society? Again, would you say that men don't talk out or show emotions like crying could be the way boys are socialized in our society? Diego, do you have any response to that?
Yeah, sure. I think the answer to that, of course, would be a resounding yes. And so that places on the table the importance of emphasizing in terms of our parenting styles and socialization of our children, our boys, to let them know, of course, that if you fall and you hurt your knee or whatever, it's okay to cry. If you're hurt, you must be able to cry or to say how you're feeling. Well, it seems that one of the best kept secrets about suicide in Guyana, the Caribbean, and around the world is that the male gender commits suicide the most. We're killing ourselves more than the women are. And again, we are also the main perpetrators of physical violence against women. Could it be because we're internalizing all our hurts and pains from small? Some of the perpetrators, without seeking to justify their actions, when we trace it back, we discover that they were, from small growing up, they've been internalizing all their hurts and pains that they're having in forms of abuse themselves, sexual, physical, verbal, and they dare not say anything, or bullied in school and they dare not say anything, but they have to man up. And so sometimes that 59 stabs that woman get, each stab represents all the bullying from small in the schoolyard. It's all of that coming out, or from that brutal stepfather or even biological father, and all those insults and all those bullyism and abuse and so. It's not even about what's happening in that moment sometimes. It's about everything finally coming out. That's what she did is probably just the straw that broke the camel's back. And so it all comes pouring out. So yeah, socialization, boys being able to express themselves from small is very, very, very important in the process of what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you, Diego. Before I go back to the comments from Facebook, I want to bring Superintendent Robinson back to the conversation because a lot of us are aware that the Guyana Police Force has what's called a zero tolerance policy when addressing domestic violence or cases of gender-based violence, which includes domestic violence. Superintendent Robinson, could you tell us what that policy is really about? Because a lot of us hear zero tolerance, but what does that mean? How would you explain that to a layman in the streets, to persons who are here as part of our audience on Facebook, and across social media? Because we are aware that some persons may have had some amount of challenges when accessing services or justice from the Guyana Police Force. I think we could be honest about that. But when we say zero tolerance, what really does that mean?
Okay, Kobe, when we said zero tolerance in respect of domestic violence or gender-based violence, Someone comes to the station to make a report. You're being abused. Some persons say they just don't want persons to know that they're being abused. Just warn the partner and like give them a tap on the back. But persons, that's why I say you have to educate persons from the simple shout can lead to murder. So prevention is better than cure. So if you start at an early age and you decide, look, let the matter go before the court, let the magistrate decide what he or she wants to do with the case. You go and you put your story to the case. It's not for the police to settle any matter at all at the station level. Let the matter go to court. So you now have a face to deal with. When you go before the court, you tell your story to the magistrate decide, okay, this need a penalty or this need a suspension sentence, or if not, you could be warned and sent away, or I put you on a bond. Because if every time you come to police to say, look, I don't want a story, police might just sit there and do nothing at all because they say you want a warning, and the man could be warned at any time. You could see him on the road warning. Warning doesn't mean that you have to arrest a person, bring him into custody to say that you warned them. You could reach them anywhere and warn them. When the police does that, persons are dissatisfied. So we decide now we have a zero tolerance in it. When you come to make a report, we let you know the matter has to go before the court. You go and you tell the magistrate what you need. So the magistrate would decide what to do from there. So that's why we call it zero tolerance, because most cases, as you could see in Guyana, leads to murder.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm really glad, you really clarified that, because for persons, across this country, is not for us to be specific to a particular region, because gender-based violence doesn't discriminate based on region or community. It happens everywhere.
It's right across.
Right across. And so I'm really glad that you really laid it out for persons to understand what the policy is. And for police officers who may be watching, for them to also know that they don't have the responsibility or the right to deal with those matters at the station. It's for them, those matters, and for police officers to really refer those matters to the court and let the magistrate deal with the matter at that stage. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So we've been having some more comments from Facebook, and I want to refer to a few. So we have Ibrahim Abdullah says, agreed, but I also believe both men and women have a part to play, as in how one is raised. We also need to address our society as a whole that goes with the 1900s mentality and refuse to acknowledge mental health issues. All of this causes many men and women emotions have a great outburst, since there's no one to talk to and to address the main mental health issues. And mental health is a constant theme that really comes up, because persons are traumatized, persons are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, some persons are depressed, some persons are challenged based on the times that we're in. This issue of COVID, the issue of high inflation rates, persons can't get to afford certain things, poverty. And so persons are really grappling with a lot. And so the point is, where exactly could persons go for those particular services? Diego, can you highlight on the point of service provision by the Ministry of Human Services, how could persons access mental health services? So we know the Ministry of Health has the suicide hotline, but from the Ministry of Human Services perspective, what are some services that are available, and how can persons access those services?
All right. As it relates specifically to mental health services, for the most part, we collaborate or refer to the mental health unit of the Ministry of Health. Here's where the networking and the collaboration comes in. That is depending on the extent of what is presented by a particular individual, if it is believed that they need further deeper psychological intervention, then they refer to the mental health unit of the Ministry of Health. Internally, however, we have our sexual offenses and domestic violence policy unit and our probation and social services department that offers counseling and certain intervention. Also, within the Gender Affairs Bureau, we also offer counseling. But depending on the extent of what is assessed, then it would be referred to the mental health unit of the Ministry of Health. And of course, we have also, we're talking about networking and collaboration. We also have those collaborations with other NGOs like Help and Shelter and so forth. We refer to them, they refer to us, and things like that, depending. So that is how it goes. And of course, there's our 914 number. This is to report any form of abuse, whether it's a man, a woman, a child, the elderly. Any form of abuse could also report to the 914 24 hours hotline.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Diego, because persons should know that there are services out there available to respond to their particular needs. But it's one thing for us it's one thing for government agencies and even the private organizations, NGOs, to have these particular services. But if persons aren't exactly coming forward to access them, then that's a problem. So it's good for us to have the opportunity to really share the information and have awareness building on those particular services. So thank you for sharing that, Diego. Another question from Facebook, it comes from Faithful Truly. That's a unique name. Can the panel discuss a little bit about how poverty in the third world countries have contributed to gender-based violence? While poverty is no justification for gender-based violence, we are plagued with in our society lots of times when the root of violence comes to the fore, it is woefully the frustration of poverty. Can we talk about this a little? Christina, can you touch on that for a second? From, and it's not just about Guyana, because Christina, you're not Guyanese, but from the regional perspective, how do you see poverty contributing to gender-based violence? Do you think that's a justification, or do you think we need to understand, based on the circumstances persons may be in, they may be depressed because they can't afford the basic necessities, food, clothing, shelter, and they lash out? Do you see that? How would you respond to that as a regional citizen or a global citizen as you are?
All right, thank you. So first and foremost, I am no psychologist or specialist within GBV, but I will say from my experience as a youth activist on gender issues or gendered issues, poverty may present as one of the many factors. And I love to say one of the many factors, because even in some of the poorest homes, and as someone who is from humble beginnings, that was raised by a single father and would have relied on a man as my very first example of a feminist. I always tell people that my father was my first feminist. My father was the first person who protected me as a young girl, and all the women in the family. I know that poverty is not a crime, and poverty by itself does not perpetuate crime. That's my opinion. And so I don't think poverty by itself is the factor for gender-based violence. I think poverty added to stress and poor coping mechanisms with stress, or poor coping mechanisms with poverty, and poor conflict resolution with poverty, and the list goes on, may result in gender-based violence. But I don't think poverty by itself will automatically mean that there will be intimate partner violence or gender-based violence or any kind of violence in the home or the community. In fact, some of the poorest communities in Jamaica that I know of, particularly in rural Jamaica where I grew up, we have the lowest levels of crime, whether it be domestic violence, types of crimes, or just other kinds of crime. We have the lowest levels of crime. So it's once again shows that poverty may not by itself is not the factor But of course, poverty, in addition to other factors, may result in gender-based violence. I think it comes back to the point that I raised earlier about everyone being empowered and educated, particularly in conflict resolution skills, as well as coping mechanism in terms of the different emotional phases that we go through as human beings. And I'm sure all of us here will agree that we do have concerning levels of domestic violence also in, we'd call them affluent communities. The difference is that those things may be settled out of court. They may never reach court. They're more hush or private, but we do have a lot of women who are victims or survivors of domestic violence from affluent communities. They are well off, but they're still victims in these situations or survivors. And so once again, poverty by itself is not the issue. Patriarchy, entitlement to a woman's body and to her person pervades all socioeconomic classes. So the fundamental reason there, if it is that it's not just convolution issues, but a man feels entitled, a man that is rich may very well still feel entitled to a woman's body because he's saying, well, listen, I'm spending all the money, I'm taking care of you. You must listen as I say and do what I say. Doesn't matter if the family is poor or not. And so we have to look at the different issues. And as you rightfully said, Kobe, the different circumstances. And that's why I will keep going back to the point that everyone, male and female, whatever gender identity, we all need to be educated in very basic skills of conflict resolution, interpersonal relationships, as well as we should all learn how our different coping mechanisms, different emotional phases. And where the different people in our society can't cope, there must be safe spaces in place to support us. And there must be a very robust health system that cater to mental health, that is not judgmental, that's not discriminatory, that welcomes all, protects all, cares for all, so we can all feel protected, empowered in the space. I think a lot of times domestic violence, we talk about earlier about, men, not being welcome in terms of becoming partners. I think one of the reasons why we see gender-based violence so prevalent is that there are people who feel that they will never be charged, that they, what's the word we'd say now, that they can do what they want and there will be no punishment.
Unity, yeah.
Right. So I think that's also another part of it that we need to look at. When we have all these mechanisms in place, everybody's supported, educated, empowered, etc., no one should feel that they're above the law. Everyone should feel that they're also protected by the law. And that's another part that we have to talk about. And the zero tolerance policy that we have, I heard Guyana police force explain that, kudos to you either in Guyana and the zero tolerance policy that you have. I'm sure there are similar sentiments here in Jamaica, but we have these terminologies and we have these policies, but they're not really in practice. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Guyana police force is not in practice. I'm just saying, generally speaking, it's not in practice, because if people really felt there was a zero tolerance policy towards GBV, why is 1 in 4 women going to become a victim of partner violence in Jamaica? If we had this zero tolerance policy, why is 1 in 4 women, every 1 in 4 women is going to be or has been a victim of intimate partner violence? And we said that we have all these policies and laws and zero tolerance policies. Like, why? So we also have to ask ourselves these type of questions, and we have to be very honest with these answers if we truly want to see change. And I think it comes from socialization in the home, socialization in the community, and if there's a religious institution at that level as well. And then we move to the next level of ensuring that there's a robust health system to support men and women. And there's also a robust legislative system and I would say enforcement institutions, whether it be the police or whatever, that is going to truly crack down on gender-based violence. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you for that intervention, Christina. Looking at time, we have 8 minutes remaining. I want to highlight some of the questions that we have from social media. We have one again from Simone Kelman, Washington. Are there mental health services available for children? Yes. Anyone who would like to access those particular services, or like to facilitate them for children could, of course, contact the Child Care and Protection Agency, CCPA. They're based in Georgetown, Broad and Smythe Streets. Their number is 227-0979, 227-0979. That's for the Child Care and Protection Agency, and certainly the agency could facilitate counseling, mental health services with respect to children. And also, if anyone is aware that a child is being abused or is a victim of violence, they should, of course, make contact with the Child Care and Protection Agency for those matters to be investigated, because we all have a duty to report if, of course, we are aware that a child or even children are being abused in any way or form. So thank you for that question. And I hope that persons will make use of those particular services there. We have another comment, and this time it comes from Nalini Ramprasad. And Nalini says, men want to hate their wives their wife because she has a sick. Some wife out there have different sick, and men hate them because they are sick. Certainly, that is a conversation worth having in terms of how exactly persons are respected, how persons are treated, how persons are loved. And certainly if, we have respect and love, then we won't see those high levels of gender-based violence in our communities. So we have that. At this particular point, I just want to ensure that I don't miss any, major question. But the last comment I want to highlight comes from Debbie Kisoon, and Debbie says a lot of men hold the preconceived notion that in order to be macho, they have to assert their authority both verbally and physically towards a woman. Women do need to be more empowered in every aspect, especially educationally. This eventually leads to their becoming more independent. And certainly, absolutely, Debbie, we can't be talking about responding to gender-based violence in terms of just going to the police station or seeking counseling. Part and parcel of responding to GBV is ensuring that women have the opportunity to be educated, which of course gives them the opportunity to become eligible for employment because they're now qualified, some kind of certificate, whether it's CSEC or some kind of diploma program, whatever it is. And so in terms of responding to gender-based violence is also about with us understanding that we need interventions that really make women independent so that they can afford those basic necessities that they may exactly want. Because the reality is that a lot of women are trapped in relationships, not necessarily literally, meaning that they're trapped in some room with a padlock, but they're trapped financially because they depend on this particular man or this husband to pay for this and pay for that. And so the men hold that power, that economic power over women. And that's also why a lot of women stay in abusive relationships, because it's really difficult for them to move forward. And we hear a lot from third parties, persons who are not in relationships, saying, why should I leave? She was this man a long time. Absolutely, we want women to leave abusive relationships, but we also need to understand that it's not always easy to do so. It's easier said than done. What do you say to someone who hasn't worked a day in their life in terms of having a salary and somebody contributes to their well-being? How do we have those particular conversations? And so those are some of the ways that we need to start thinking in terms of understanding this issue. We have 4 minutes remaining. I want to give each of our panelists about 30 seconds for final comments. What key message, because we're talking about partnerships to address gender-based violence, what key message in 30 seconds would you want to leave to our audience, to survivors? Any key message you would want to leave based on your agency, based on your background, based on your experience? We'll take Superintendent Robinson, then Alfonso, and then Christina.
Thank you, Kobe. I think parenting play a pivotal role in gender-based violence because we grow our children in such a way we decide from an early age, decide what work a boy have to do in a home, what a work girl have to do in a home. We shouldn't have no separation. And the other thing, we try to impose on our sons that you should not cry in public. It's offensive to do that. You wouldn't want your son to play with a doll because he might turn a gay in years to come. But playing with a doll is showing love. He will know how to love his wife, how to love his girlfriend, how to treat her. So gender-based, we have to start from the home, training our children how to become men and women out there and not just tell them, no, you can't do this and you can't do that. They need those exposure. So I'm advising that allow your boy child to show his emotion, which is very important to take him through life. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Diego, 30 seconds, then Christina.
Sure, thank you. And so I would encourage all those that are involved in this work of stamping out gender-based violence is to, for example, at the Ministry of Human Services, one of the things we've done recently is to establish regional men's groups. And so we continue to reach out to men and boys. We continue to engage them, meet them at the football clubs, the cricket clubs, wherever they are, the barbershops. And we go to them, we go to where they are and we interact, we have conversations with them. And so let's not see men as the enemy and the villain, but let's see them as partners. Let's talk with them. Let's, reach out to them. Men, not only the victims need help, men need help too.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Diego. Christina, 30 seconds.
Yes. My key message is that I want us to work towards a world where every child and every young person, regardless of gender identity, is educated and empowered on how to have good interpersonal relationships. And that requires interdisciplinary, or rather say multi-stakeholder approach to how we socialize, because socialization doesn't only take place in the homes, communities, at the school, at all levels. And so I would want us to work towards that, where every young person, every child is empowered, whether through the education that they have, the interpersonal relationships that they have, they are empowered where they can go on and take care of themselves financially as well, because as you said rightfully, Kobe, women tend to stay in relations because they're not financially empowered. And I think if we have that as a basic first step, we will be able to see a reduction in GBV and a reduction in violence overall in our region and our world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina. Thank you to our panelists, Superintendent Robinson, Diego, Christina. This has been another episode of Let's Talk Gender-Based Violence, a production by Marundai with the kind support from the Caribbean Vulnerable Communities Coalition, CVC. Certainly, we would want to invite you to join us next week for another episode of Let's Talk GBV. Next week, we'll be talking about masculinities and gender-based violence. That's very interesting, and we'll be placing on the front burner the issue of the engagement of men and boys in responding to these particular issues. We want to thank our Marundai team for supporting us, but also we want to thank Virtual Solutions Guyana, who really has been providing exceptional technical support to us for the hosting of these shows. So thank you. I hope you stay well, and let's continue this process, this journey, this fight to really prevent and eradicate gender-based violence in all corners of our region, all corners of our country, and across the world. Thank you so much and take care.